Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched, where this week I watched Grease from 1978. Now, for longtime viewers of the channel and this series, folks will already know that I have been a big fan of musicals and musical theater and musical movies for a long time and have a fairly storied history with them. I've watched a number on this series alone, in addition to having a lot from my childhood. Grease is one that has always come up in conversation, but one that I have never watched. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is it just does not, nothing about it grabs me right off the bat. I've heard some of the songs from it before, some of them many times. I've seen clips from the film before. I know bits and pieces of it. You know, it is culturally pervasive enough that I would be hard pressed not to know anything about it, knowing what I do about other musicals that exist in cinema in general. And it is generally pretty well regarded. I'm just going to be upfront and say it is even worse than I thought it was going to be. It is well-produced garbage. I don't get it at all. And if you love this film, you're welcome to stay for the remainder of this video and have a metered and polite response to my points, because I'm not just going to be unfair to it, but I don't get it. And if this is your favorite movie and you want to defend it violently, then you can excuse yourself now. I am confused what this movie is supposed to be. And in fact, it is in a weird nebulous place, both cinematically, stylistically, artistically. I don't know who it's for or even what it's really about. This is made in 1978, which is weird because I've always had the sense, even before watching it, that Grease is a movie that for some reason exists it seems like it's both older and newer than late 70s. Part of that is the obvious part, which is that it is set in an earlier period. I think it's set in like the 50s. But that's not the main thing. The main thing is there's a bunch of production stuff that is weirdly not apocryphal. What's the word I'm looking for? The word for it doesn't fit the time and place. But part of it is that it is attempting to ape a style, not only in its the culture and the costumes and the hair and the makeup and those sorts of things, but it's not doing a particularly good job on a bunch of fronts. I'm probably not going to dig too far into that because that's into the minutia of a movie that has much grander problems than that. On a more fundamental level, I don't know who this movie is for. Is this targeted at nostalgia? Was this, when it released, let's say, was this targeted at a nostalgic feeling for people who grew up in the 50s? If it's set about 20, 25 years later, is that the target audience? What was the target? Because there are so many things in here that even for the late 70s feel like they would have been a little bit out of place. And in a modern viewing, it does not age well in a whole lot of different ways. But even that I'm going to skim over because, again, this movie has larger problems than crappy attitudes towards women and gay people and other things and slurs being used. Actually, I don't think they make some jokes, but I don't think they actually use slurs. But it does not age well on that front. Where do we even start with this? plot wise, there is no plot going on here. I could not tell you what the plot is other than, I mean, spoilers here if you think there's a plot. Two boy and girl meet over the summer, then they go to high school, and then they are fussy about each other because they're fucking high schoolers, and every piece of drama is the most nothing burger ever. It's boring. There's no plot. It's just high schoolers being high schoolers. Meanwhile, these high schoolers are played by people in their late 20s and early 30s. So completely, I can suspend my disbelief to some extent, but this is bad. Like, at no point am I looking at any of these characters and thinking any of them are in any way believable as teenagers, as high schoolers. And that's further worsened by the fact that none of them are written like they are high schoolers either. This is not, I don't believe that this is a misjudgment on my part purely on the basis of being from a different era. These people do not speak, they barely speak like humans, let alone like high schoolers. And the way that they process their thoughts and experiences and the way they have their emotional responses is not good in general. And their general reaction, like, it's not even that they're over the top. In fact, that's kind of the problem, is that this movie is not cheesy enough. But we'll put a pin in that for a second. Most of the actors, I think, are fairly unremarkable. I don't think Travolta is a good lead in most things. I don't think he's particularly great in here either. I don't think he plays the role that they've set out for him particularly well. Funny enough, apparently he was in stage productions of this, but not as this character. So that's kind of funny. And then there's Olivia Newton-John, who is kind of fine, but is mostly there for her singing prowess, not for her acting. There's very little acting going on. There's very little acting going on in a lot of the cast, to be perfectly honest. And Olivia Newton-John probably stands out in the film because she sings probably the best songs. That not being a very high bar, but her vocal chops are undeniable, and for the time, or for the movie, she definitely has the best vocal performances, bar none. It's not even close. Then there's the problem of the music itself, which I find to be generally at best unremarkable and unmemorable, and at worst incredibly boring and borderline offensive. The songs also come with almost no context throughout the film. They are heavily weighted towards the second half of the film as well. And that's not to say that's because they needed to load up the front half with plot, because there's no plot in the front half either. So they are just sort of twiddling their thumbs for the first half for the most part too. And then they heavily weight the music towards the second half. Plot beats happen seemingly at random, just random events that are going to happen to this cadre of so-called high schoolers, because they need to have something to happen on screen. What was the thing I said I was going to put a pin in? Maybe I'll come back around to it. Where do we meander from here? It's just boring. It's just boring. It's a bad musical, and it's a bad narrative, and it's poorly acted, and the songs are dull. The number of times I remember, it was the tonal thing. There are a couple of times throughout, this movie does have a slightly comedic skew to it, but it's not enough. And I think I gave a light chuckle about twice, and far more times than that, I either verbally said, "What the fuck is happening?" or I like audibly retched at something someone said or did because it was just kind of offensive. Not even in the most direct way, just like, who would write that? Like, it's just absurd. I can't even remember I can't even pinpoint specific occasions when that happened, because this movie left so little impact on me that it's completely unmemorable in that respect. As far as the tone goes and its level of comedy and cheesiness and etc., the weirdest thing to me is that everybody I've ever heard talk about this movie very much, or that they liked it or something like that, seems to take it at pretty face value. That it's like, oh, they like the narrative of the romance between these characters, and I don't get that at all. All these characters have no chemistry together. They have no character development in any substantial way. If they have any change of character, it happens because the plot requires it, not because they visibly learned a lesson or, had a change of heart or something like that. And the comedy is not good enough to lighten the tone. So there's not a lot going in that respect. I think, and I don't know the intentions of the original writing of the stage musical or this production of it. This reads to me like it should be a heavy satire. And in particular, this is reinforced by the casting of a bunch of these, older folks. To be fair, this was a time and place where they were not doing a very good job of casting kids for kids. That's sort of something that I think writers and producers learned somewhere in the 90s, where they could actually cast young adults as approximately the age that was appropriate. And also they could write kids like kids. If you need to write a child, that child is an idiot. That's just a fact. There are no smart children. I'm being a little bit facetious here, but my point being that children and young adults behave very differently from most adults. There is a noticeable difference in the conduct and the way they speak and the way they think and the way their emotions flow. And somewhere in the 90s and 2000s, writers finally figured out how to get the chaos of a teenager's brain written out into narrative form. Somehow before that was not possible for some reason. So this is not unique in that respect. But this whole thing feels like, to me, like it should be a heavy satire. Like it's the face value version of it, that almost earnest aspect of it should be taken as satire, as a mockery of these characters who are, lacking in self-awareness, lacking in critical thinking skills or understanding of other people's emotional states or the impact they have on other people. But between the writing problems and the fact that the dialogue problems, the content problems between the existing characters, and the fact that there is no framework within the overarching narrative, where the adults, the parental and students and stuff like, or teachers and things like that, they're really only there in the existing film as a sort of comedic counterpoint. They have no authority. So rather than using them as an opportunity to present a perspective of, oh, it's these shit kids again being shit kids, there's no opportunity taken to point out the absurdity, to point out the satire of kids getting their first cars and worrying about these stupid little things going on in their relationships and the ups and downs of high school relationships, which when you're an adult seem, so tiny. But when you're that age, seem very, they can seem very high stakes. And it's not until you become an adult and you get that perspective to go, oh no, that's just how kids are. That's the experience of being a teenager and having those, those hormonal, emotional responses and all these other things. But none of that is taken into account. And so it's just taken straight. It's just read straight. And these characters who are toxic and awful to each other, and behave, reprehensibly towards people who they ostensibly care about, are painted as this sort of pseudo-romantic musical wonderland. And really the last nail in the coffin of that for me is the final shot of the movie where they're literally at a carnival and then they fly off in a car into the sky. And it's like, how is this not a joke? How is this not satire? How is this not making fun of the perspective of kids? Of like, there should be the opposite shot where they are imagining themselves driving off into a fantastical, sunset or some such thing. And then there's the reverse shot of over the shoulder of like the principal or something seeing a car that's not painted the same way, that's like backfiring and stuff, going, oh, these shit kids in their stupid car again. That's where the humor is. That's the real humor of this story, is these kids are kids, and they should be kids, and they're awful. And I don't understand why anybody would like them. But it doesn't have any of that self-awareness. It doesn't have any of that perspective. It doesn't have any of that quality of writing. And as a musical, it fails as well. Like I said, the music is fairly unremarkable. I think Travolta's really mainly cast here because of his dancing ability, not his acting or vocal chops. Although, I don't know, I've never understood why people think he's particularly good at any of those things. Yeah, it's just really rough. I am so curious for people who saw this as a kid, whether they like it in retrospect or not. I can see how, from a very young person's perspective, this gets a pass, because when you're a kid, you don't need a lot of, you ignore a lot of the foibles of adult criticism and stuff like that. And so as just sort of people doing stuff and singing songs sometimes, I'm sure for kids this would pass. There's a bunch of topics in it that I don't think are appropriate for kids, but people show this to their kids all the time anyway. Confuses the heck out of me. But that aside, I'm so curious for people who, especially I think of my generation, I imagine that the fan base for this movie skews significantly older, mostly people who saw it about when it came out. I mean, I guess it would have probably not gotten a re-release until the late 80s because, well, it could have gone back into theaters, but that's a whole other discussion about when we first got home video and stuff like that. But it's a weird movie. I don't get it at all. I don't get the appeal. And I don't think anybody's doing a critical reading of it or a contextual, like, meta reading, which seems to me to be the obvious choice when something is so bad on its face. Anyway, yeah, not a fan. It's a weird one, and I'll never watch it again. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist. I'll see you guys next time.